Welcome to the Impact Room, brought to you by Douglas Jackson, who help you hire more impactful, diverse leaders who stay for longer and are more successful. The Impact Room is a business, CX and leadership podcast where exceptional, diverse and impactful leadership and wisdom is shared. We dive deep into pressing topics that impact your customer-led business, featuring interviews with CEOs, COOs, Chief Customer, Chief People Officers, directors, influential leaders and subject matter experts who share their lived experiences, top tips, thoughts, advice and industry trends to help elevate existing and future talent. So let's dive into our next episode, and please don't forget to like, subscribe or share if you enjoy this content. Thank you.
Welcome to today's episode of the Impact Room. Today we are joined by Vicki Joshi, the business leader with a customer-centric approach. How are you today, Vicki? You well?
I'm very good, thank you, John. Yourself?
Good, yeah, not too bad. Yeah, all good, thank you. Sun's shining, it's April and we've had lots of sunshine. So I'm sure that it will probably mean that the summer months aren't going to be the best, because that's what usually happens when you get an early sunshine. But yeah, it's very, very, very well. Vicki, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself to those that don't know you, will know your background, a brief sort of elevator pitch, so to speak, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So thanks for having me on the podcast today, John. I started my kind of customer centricity passion and career more than 20 years ago, back at a market research agency, actually, talking to customers about what made them want to spend their money with different brands, or what made them want to stop spending their money and their time with different brands. I found that absolutely fascinating and built my career from there, really. I used to run big global programs, trying to find out what made customers tick and why they wanted to spend their money with different providers of their telecoms, their financial services, retailers, FMCG organisations.
Sure.
And then started working with organisations to help them really define what their customer strategy was going to be and how that was going to help them deliver their business and financial strategies. From there, I went on to work at KPMG, where I worked in the insurance practice, in the customer operations team, and then went on to look after the customer and digital team across financial services. Most recently, I've been Chief Customer and Brand Officer at AXA across the UK and Ireland. And yes, it's been really interesting going from both professional services into industry, but very happy to be here today.
It's safe to say that you've got a well-rounded experience in customer then, right? So
I like to think so, but you might test me today. Let's go for it.
Well, let's see. So I suppose that'll lead us on straight into the first question. So why do you believe that customer centricity is the biggest differentiator in today's insurance market?
I'm not sure I actually do believe it is the biggest differentiator in today's insurance market.
Would you say it's price and price alone?
I don't think it's price and price alone, and I do think customer centricity has the opportunity to become a bigger differentiator for insurers than it already is. But I think customer expectations have evolved rapidly over the last few years, with more expectations around how do we personalise their products and their experiences, making sure they have seamless interactions with their insurer, that we're transparent, and they can really understand what they've purchased and how they need to use it. But unfortunately, the insurance industry is often criticised for a lack of some of these things, or a perceived lack of these things, should I say, from a consumer perspective, where people find it can be overly complex. It can be difficult to really understand what products and services they've got and the cover that they've got. And for many insurers, I think that is quite difficult to keep on top of those changing consumer demands and expectations. But what I do think is really important from a customer centricity perspective is, it's not to say that in my experience that insurers do not care deeply about their customers. They absolutely do. But I do think that there is more that could be done to put customer centricity at the heart of the business, alongside, good commercial and good conduct outcomes than is being done at the moment.
Yeah, okay, that's fair comment. I would probably agree with that. So, in your experience, what would you say is the most overlooked element of CX that insurers need to get right?
I don't, again, It's probably not an insurance only challenge, but I would say probably the biggest overlooked element at the moment is how do you make your products and your services accessible by design? So what I mean by that is things including how do you make sure that you've got simple language, you're being really transparent and easy to deal with, but also taking specific steps to ensure that those with like physical or neurodiverse needs are catered for. So a really interesting stat, the purple pound, which refers to, I guess, the collective spending power of those disabled individuals in the UK and their families. So that's about 16 million people across the UK at the moment. So about 1 in 5 of our potential consumers out there is worth about 274 billion in terms of spending power in 2024. And I think more and more organisations, insurers and those outside of insurance need to be really thinking about how do they make their products and their services accessible by design so that everybody, regardless of their needs, can get access to them easily.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I didn't realise that there was it was that big of a proportion of the market space.
It's huge.
And I suppose, yeah, absolutely massive. And I know that a lot of insurers and again, you know, with a lot of this, we're saying insurers, but this spans across pretty much, you know, certainly regulated industries. And I know that there's been certain struggles or trying to understand vulnerable customers better, and also trying to identify vulnerable customers at the first point possible to make sure that they're getting, you know, a fair value, fair outcome, and understand things, you know, a lot earlier in the journey than what has been traditional. Just you know, do you think that with the change of customer demands and, you know, everything going digital, do you think that sometimes there might be a less of a focus on, you know, what that means for vulnerable customers as well? Because certain vulnerable customers may not be able to read, right? And what does that journey look like through online, or even if they're sort of elderly, etc., computer literacy, shall we say?
Yeah, I don't think there's less of a focus at all. And I think consumer duty absolutely continues from the regulators to make sure that all insurers have got a really clear focus on vulnerable customers. And I think there's also a nuance that we need to consider around, I guess, what the FCA might consider a vulnerable customer, and also those that might have an accessibility need but don't want to be seen as vulnerable.
Yeah,
and therefore don't necessarily want to be seen as somebody that needs special treatment, but just want their needs to be understood and met by whichever organisation it is that they're dealing with. I think that this is why I picked, I guess, accessible by design as my kind of key thing that I feel is constantly overlooked. We can cater for the needs of everybody by really thinking about those that have got extreme needs. And I think vulnerability is one of those things that, you know, there are so many different types of vulnerabilities out there. You know, whether that's financial, physical, emotional, there's a whole set of things that happen to us in circumstances, and then things that we might be living with for our entire lives that create an element of vulnerability. But it's really difficult as well for organisations to be able to capture all of those things and think about what's the specific response to each and every single one of those. However, what we can do is make sure that when we're thinking about the design of our products and our services, that we're doing those with that spectrum of needs in mind. And by doing that, what you should do is design products and services that do more automatically meet the needs of vulnerable customers or those with accessibility needs than, you know, having to go off and create sort of special lines, special treatment and various different things. There will always be cases for people that might be hearing impaired, sight impaired, etc., people that might be using you know, digital tools or accessibility tools to be able to access information, where you do need to make sure your technology absolutely talks to their technology in order for them to be able to get access to the service. You know, this is not simple and it's not straightforward, which is why, you know, I really do believe that this could be a real game changer for any insurer or any organisation that builds this thinking into its design, and that design goes right through from thinking about new products and services right through to how you deliver those for your people, your technology, your infrastructure, your security. Everything needs to consider how accessible you are.
Yeah, okay, and that actually leans quite neatly onto to the next question, to be fair, which is, there's often the debate on balancing automation with, the human-led service and the human touch, so to speak. How do you see technology enhancing rather than replacing that sort of human touch across the customer experience?
So I think there's lots of different ways that technology can improve and help us deliver better customer experiences, whether that's joining the dots across different channels for people to be able to go in one channel and not have to tell us who they are again in the next channel, to make sure that they don't drop off halfway through an experience and we can capture them and help them achieve the outcome that they intended to achieve. Or even just making, our claims process simpler and more straightforward for people. But there's a reality that we're always going to need humans, and humans are always going to be particularly important, especially in an insurance business where you could be having a claim and that could be something that's particularly complex, or it could be something that's particularly emotional or difficult to deal with. So it's about making sure that you understand, I guess, the end-to-end journeys that customers can go through, how they might choose to do that through digital channels or human channels, and making sure that it can seamlessly go between those different channels in a way that doesn't feel like it's convoluted or difficult. And we take all of the heavy lifting by employing, the right back end data systems and solutions that mean that, if customers doing one thing digitally and then they call us up the next minute, we can instantly see what they were doing and we can support them with getting that through to resolution.
Yeah, and just to your point there, really, upon point of claim, I think everybody differs in that. I mean, from a personal perspective, that I wouldn't want to, and I suppose it depends on value of claim. Now, value of claim as well isn't necessarily monetary value of claim, right? It will be how much that thing is valued by that person, right? And I mean, if you look at life covers or pet covers, they're very highly emotional claims that you're gonna be dealing with on both sides, right? From a personal point of view, I think I would rather be speaking with somebody on the phone to explain the nuances and get things out rather than trying to do it online. And I do feel that balance is critical, where you're right in what you say. Even if it was a case that, the first part is online forms automation, then seamlessly into speak to somebody to then go through, because a lot of people wouldn't have made a claim previously either. So, just somebody to explain the process, what to expect, what the next steps will be, that kind of thing can be really reassuring to people who are dealing or suffering with any type of loss, really.
I completely agree, and I think there's so many misconceptions as well, that maybe younger generations just want to do everything digitally. Well, actually, financial services and insurance is complex, and often you do want someone to sort of hold your hand through that process and talk you through it. So I think, it's easy to assume that this sort of new generations that are very digitally literate just want to complete everything through digital channels. That is certainly not the case. And it's about making sure that people have got the option, and that seamless interaction between digital and human is what organisations need to absolutely focus on, because if it becomes clunky and it becomes difficult, that's when things break down. That's when things that could really enhance a customer journey or a customer experience actually turn people into sort of real go down the complaints route, or they become really frustrated with a particular organisation for just not quite getting it right, even though we might have tried.
I think that, away from insurance, if you take that concept across any walk of life, how frustrating is it when something doesn't work the way that it's supposed to work? Whereas if it's simpler and you're prepared for what the journey is going to look like before you go into it, even if you know that you wouldn't be able to complete any online form. Not saying that it's perfect, but if you know that there's going to be a wait time to speak to somebody, I think expectations are massive, and I think it's setting out those expectations to the customer and doing it correctly, which really can set service apart. Obviously, in the more streamlined, the better way that you can get technology to working throughout that journey is going to be a game changer. But let's face it, nothing works perfect first time, right? There's always refinements, and there's always things that need to be changed and sort of looked at. But yeah, I personally, I can't see there, at the end of the day, I know it's cliche here, but it is a people's business, it really relies on people. So there's not a world that I can see where automation just completely takes over.
Absolutely.
Listen, in 10, 15 years time, once I'm a little bit more trustworthy of technology, I suppose.
Okay.
Probably the wrong word to use, trustworthy. But once you get used to it, there might be a point. But at this moment in time, I just couldn't imagine myself doing everything cradle to grave through online digital
I'm with
means.
you.
And I believe that I'm reasonably literate when using technology to a certain extent, Vicky. Things go wrong, then without turning it off and then back on and shouting at it, I'm out of ideas. But when it's working, I tend to be all right with it. So yeah, no, absolutely fair enough. So be interesting to understand your opinion from sort of a brand perspective.
Mm-hmm.
What role does trust play in insurance, and how do you actively build and maintain that with customers? You'd imagine, looking at it from outside in, trust is what insurance is built on, right? But what do you see from your sort of perspective?
Yeah, look, trust is absolutely critical in the insurance industry. It affects everything from how you attract a new customer to how you maintain and retain the customers that you've got today. But as an industry, especially in the personal lines industry, it again isn't necessarily known for having good consumer trust. And that's often because people hear about things when they go wrong. We're not great as an industry at talking about when we do things right, which is 99.9% of the time. And, I think there's things that we do unintentionally sometimes, which, as we talked about earlier, the complexity, the perceived lack of transparency, the pricing increases, etc. People don't understand how their data is necessarily always being used. And I think that sort of stuff, that lack of understanding drives a kind of perception of mistrust from a consumer point of view. And it's also quite a difficult product because it's those sort of products that you buy with that sort of mentality of, I hope I never have to use this product.
Yeah, of course.
So, you don't necessarily have the same opportunities to build trust with your customers day in, day out. If you think about sort of you might claim 1 in 8, 1 in 8 customers might claim something, or 1 in 10, something like that, depending on the different product type. And if you're not going through a claims process, actually being able to sort of deliver value or perceived value for consumers is quite difficult because they're paying for something that they're not necessarily having to use. Therefore, again, they don't necessarily trust or understand, the value and the benefit that they're getting. So I think building trust against that backdrop is particularly difficult in the insurance market. And I also think that from an insurer's perspective, we've not had the same burning platform that the banks did after the 2008 financial crash. That meant that they had no choice but to go back to basics and to start to think about what did their customers need and start to think about how they built consumer trust. So for me, from a brand point of view, being really clear on who you are, what you stand for, and what you do, and then intentionally making sure that that is designed into those products and those experiences is absolutely critical. Thinking about that above and beyond the point of claim for an insurer is really important. So what are the different moments in a customer's life cycle with you where you can absolutely demonstrate value and demonstrate that you are a brand that says and delivers on its promises, it says and says what it's going to do and it delivers on those promises. I always think back to a great banking example, actually, after the 2008 financial crash back in America, called Ally Bank. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. But in about 2009, they started coming out with some great ads. And effectively, one example was they had a guy that was sat in a room with 2 little girls. And he said to the first little girl, "Do you want a pony?" And she said, "Oh, yes, please." And he gives her this little toy pony, and comes the little toy pony. He says to the other girl, "Do you want a pony?" She says, "Yes, please." And in walks a real life pony. And the first little girl's face is like, "What? You didn't tell me I could have a real pony." And the guy says, "Well, you never asked." And at the end of the advert, he goes, they talk about, look, LA Bank, we're not here to hide behind the small print. We're here to make sure that, everybody gets a fair and equitable experience with us. And I thought that was such a great way of starting to demonstrate that they understood the mistrust that people had had of banks before the financial crash, and that they were trying to do things differently. I just don't think we've had quite the burning platform in insurance to do things in quite the same way. I'd say the last thing I would say on trust is, I think what consumers, especially in the personal lines market, trust is the price comparison websites.
Yeah.
They trust that they're going to give them the information that they need to make the most, the best decision that's going to be right for them at that point in time. So I think they hold a lot of the trust at the moment, but that still means you do still, in order to get chosen on those price comparison websites, need to have a brand that people have seen and know.
Yeah.
And you need to make sure that you are, on the whole, delivering what customers need day in, day out, and building that trust little by little. But it's certainly it's a long game. It's building trust. It's certainly, and unfortunately, it's quickly lost if you don't do things the right way.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, if you think about any experience that you have that's negative, I can't remember the exact statistics on it, but it's absolutely night and day in comparison to that. If you've had a good experience, you might tell 3 people. If you've had a bad experience, you're telling, as many people as you can, how many people can you fit in a room, sort of thing. Because, and I think that leads to people's frustrations. And I think a lot of it is all geared around sort of frustration. But I think that there is something that could probably be done in terms of just using those stories a little bit better, of the good news stories, and maybe trying to engage with customers midterm. Because I think in a lot of instances, it's, you take out the policy obviously on a personal line, you don't hear anything until it's a week before your renewal, and it's an email or a letter saying, hey, it's time for your renewal, at which point that acts as the sort of point to go back onto the comparison sites. And I do think that it's on the comparison sites, it's not always apples for apples, and I don't think a lot of people, I mean, if we take motor, believe that a comprehensive cover is a standard cover that all of the insurers provide, and it covers everything the same, which just isn't true. But absolutely. I think there's, that lack of education on the specifics of exactly what is being covered. And that's very difficult in the situation of the price comparison sites, because the one thing that anybody's looking at on there more than anything else is price. I mean, it gets listed with the cheapest first, right? So you're not going to go to typically you're not going to go all the way to the most expensive and see what that might cover you for or on, right? But I do think that maybe there are some gains to be made midterm with customer interaction, customer experience, maybe initiatives, or I just feel that there may be more that could be being done. But I'm sure that you're in a better place to know about that, Vicky, than I have been, just standing on the outside and looking in, right?
I think there are lots of things that are being done. I just think, you also have to think about, as an insurer, where you sit in people's lives and their priorities. You are there because they need you, not necessarily because they want to engage with you on a regular basis. So it's about thinking about, where can you add value, and where do you have permission to add value, and to have that and build that sort of more long-term relationship with those consumers. So I absolutely think there is more that can be done. I think there is going to be more that will be done through partnerships and finding different routes to being able to engage with those customers about the things that really matter in their lives at the right moment, in the right way. And I think, this is where data and understanding your customers comes in really importantly. Massive. This is where some of the banks and the information that they hold becomes incredibly important. And if they've got an insurance arm, etc., they almost are at an advantage, because they already understand where are people spending their money. Yes. What are they, how much disposable income have they got? What might, are they getting to the end of the month and they're particularly financially stressed? You can really start to target people with things that are much more specific and useful for them in that context. We as insurers, as anybody under GDPR, make sure we only have the information that's right for us to hold. So it's about thinking about where that sweet spot is between, the role that we play as an insurer, but also being able to make sure that we are constantly thinking about how can we add value and develop those relationships with our customers.
Yeah, okay, and that makes a lot of sense. I mean, even if you look at, and I'll just use this brand just as an example because it's the first one that's come to my head. But if you look at Vitality, who obviously offer life cover, they do an awful lot of engagement around prevention or trying to get people up and active. You just look at the park runs that they sponsor, and it's people out there running, and it's constantly seeing that brand attached to its niche almost. So now rather than looking at life cover as covering your life, it's more about health and fitness. It's almost got that sort of swayed on it. But you're quite correct in what you're saying, that with more data being collected and analyzed correctly, you get a lot more customer insights. Then you understand what the customer wants, sees, feels and hears. And then you can start to either change products to be more specific towards them, or it certainly gives you a lot more of a sort of pool in which to focus either marketing or communications or that type of thing, partnerships as you said. So yeah, absolutely. So what metrics do you use to track success of customer-led initiatives, and how do you tie that down back to commercial performance?
So I think, look, there's a whole suite of different metrics that you can look at, and it really depends on what it is you're actually trying to achieve with that particular initiative. But every good organisation that understands the importance of making sure it's thinking about its customers knows that you have to have a balanced scorecard that has a really good balance of customer metrics, your brand metrics, your operational metrics and your commercial metrics, those as well as obviously your people metrics. Those things need to come together. And from a customer metrics perspective and a brand perspective, we look at things like your relationship net promoter score. And relationship net promoter is particularly important because that takes into account all of the various different interactions and things that could influence someone's likelihood to recommend you as an organisation. So that goes above and beyond, did you have a good phone call when you spoke to us in our contact centre? And it talks about, all of the different things you've seen about our brand and our purpose. It's about our products and our services, our price, as well as any of the interactions that you might have had with us. So, relationship NPS in the insurance industry is a particularly important measure. I would also say then when you start to think about more tactically and people are actually having an interaction with us, things about, so how easy was it to achieve what they needed to? Did they achieve it first time? Right first time is one of those metrics that can be really difficult for organisations to get the data on, because sometimes you go, yes, high five, we managed to get them the outcome that they needed on that phone call, but what we didn't realise that they'd been on the website for half an hour trying to figure out how to do it themselves first. So that comes back to what we talked about earlier in the way that technology needs to start to allow organisations to connect those dots so we can instantly see that somebody might be calling our contact centre, we might have given them the information they needed then, but they've already, actually we've already failed because this is the second time they've tried to achieve that outcome. We also think about things like how do we connect it back to, like, say, the commercial data. So look at customer lifetime value and multi-product holdings. So what do we need to do, and what's the difference between how satisfied or how likely a customer is to recommend and their actual behaviour, purchasing behaviour, and their renewals behaviour with us. So, and then you can start to think about, you might have a project which is all around how do I make sure that we are driving out, pain points for our customers, but driving better operational efficiency. Well, in that potential project, you might be thinking about how do we make sure we see a reduction in failure demand into the contact centre, because we're going to be able to make sure that people have achieved what they needed to first time online, or when they called the contact centre, they got the instant information that they needed. So there's a whole suite of different metrics that you would consider, John. It just depends on what it is you're actually trying to achieve with that particular project. I would say from a brand perspective, you should always be looking as well at, your brand awareness and consideration. And then again, how does that then translate into sales? So you can use things like econometrics data, which takes in both your brand data, but also your business and your commercial data. And you can start to see the connection between when you're live with campaigns and the uptick in sales, or, you know, sometimes when you go out there with a particular message and it actually has the opposite effect. So, you know, it really is all about having the right suite of metrics and being able to monitor those over a period of time, and being able to see, like I said earlier, you know, how do those customer and brand metrics perform alongside the commercial metrics and the operational metrics and your people metrics. I remember it's years ago now, doing a really big piece of work with an old client, and they had contact centres with thousands and thousands of people and had over 16 million customers that they were dealing with. And this is back, I guess, before the big takeoff of digital self-service. And it was a bank, and we did a big piece of work, and we took their customer experience data and their people data, so how enabled and engaged their staff were. And they had a hypothesis that they've been working to for a number of years, that the people that were delivering poor customer experiences were also disengaged and didn't feel very enabled. Actually, what we found was the people that felt disengaged and sort of disenabled were doing everything they possibly could to sort of run on the hamster's wheel to make sure the customers still got a really great outcome, even though the systems and the processes that were supporting them were not necessarily up to scratch and doing what they needed them to. The people at the top who were really engaged and enabled were delivering great service, but there was this group of people in the middle that kind of were a little bit ambivalent, that were actually delivering the poorest of the customer experience. Now, it was only by being able to bring together that kind of internal pulse employee data, with the customer metrics, that we were able to actually do a bit of myth busting and understand, actually, it's the people that sit in this group that are delivering poor customer experience because they just don't care enough. So actually that completely changed the approach that they took to how they were going to, you know, drive engagement and drive up customer satisfaction moving forward. So, you know, metrics are incredibly powerful. What you don't want to do is have too many. And I would always say, you know, relationship NPS, consideration and awareness are absolutely critical for any business at a strategic level. And then think about what metrics you need that are going to support your ambition that sit below that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it is quite interesting, really, that the people. Well, it makes a lot of sense when you say it out loud. It sounds very simple. That if you don't care about the customer's outcome, then if you're not passionate about customer service and you're in a customer service role, on whatever form it is, if you don't have the passion to deliver,
exactly,
you ain't going to deliver. You know, it sounds pretty simple, but sometimes you need to take a step back to actually look at it. It's only obvious once it's obvious.
Yeah,
you know
exactly.
what I mean? So
absolutely. And I think that's the power of data, and that's the power of being customer centric. You know, you need to go in. You can't just go in and say, this is what I think customers would like, or this is what 6 people have told me. You do need to still be really data and evidence led. But, you know, data can lift the lid on all sorts of different things that you just didn't quite, or you thought you understood, but you didn't quite understand the nuance that you needed to consider in order to really unlock a strategy, or to really unlock some value that you've been trying to get hold of. So I think that's a great example. Like you say, once you know it, it just absolutely makes sense. But, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And that business had been making a lot of assumptions for a long period of time.
As I should imagine that many, you know, in any industry sector will have done over periods of time. But it is quite interesting because, you know, data is a massive focus at the moment within insurance, and it's not just about how to, you know, right at the very beginning at the moment, so how to even capture the data, before then how to capture the relevant data, how to segment that data, and how to analyze that data. That's all to come. So in many ways it's a very exciting time, because it hasn't even scratched the surface of it yet. But I've always found it quite strange that insurance specifically is a little bit behind the curve when it comes to data and using data, considering that the whole industry was, you know, made on that anyway. So it's great at capturing certain parts of data and holds that part of data and analyzes that part of data. But so many have just gone through the fingertips over the last definitely the last 10 years, and I do see, and I do feel that there are a lot more initiatives at the moment to be data first. And I think that is very, very exciting, not just for customer, but also for, everything, including supply chain, including, the
pricing,
claims, pricing, everything, the whole
agree.
kit and caboodle, really. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds as we sort of move forward.
It will.
But so many insurers struggle to move from customer intent to actual customer-led transformation. What do you think is the thing that holds businesses back the most?
I think it's a combination of things. I would probably say there's a bit of myth that still hangs around in a lot of insurance that, being customer-led is instead of being commercially or conduct-led. I think people don't understand that these things, my teams over the years get a bit bored of me doing this. This is me and my triangle. If it's good for our customers, it's good for our conduct agenda, and it's good for our commercials. Those are that's my three points on the golden triangle. And I think, you can do all of those three things, but you have to do them intentionally. And without doing it intentionally, you will often see that there are unintended consequences to decisions you might make from a pure kind of operational commercial perspective, or you're thinking through a pure conduct lens. Or even if you're just thinking about this is the right thing to do for our customers. I often think, a great example would be people used to talk about Amazon and one-click ordering, and that had set an expectation for how insurers needed to go off and deliver their experiences to customers. Well, actually, if we make it too easy, people are not going to be able to read and understand what they're taking out. So from a conduct perspective, we are not ensuring that customers are buying and purchasing products that are 100% right for them, right? So we can't make it too simple and too straightforward, because that will stop people from necessarily engaging with the information in the right way so they can make good choices that are right for them. So you need to consciously make sure that you're always thinking about, how do I make sure that this is good outcomes for my customer from a conduct perspective and from a commercial perspective. And I think at the moment, a lot of organisations see those three things as, yes, there's a connection, but I'm not sure they understand the strength of that connection as well as they could do to drive, moving from, like you say, intent into customer-led transformation. I'd also say, look, a lot of organisations are wading through legacy and tech debt, and actually driving the change can be really difficult. You might absolutely have the right ambitions and the right intentions to go off and do things in a more customer-centric way, but if you've got legacy systems that are just you're not able to configure in the right way from a customer perspective, and that's cost prohibitive, then that stops a lot of organisations from necessarily moving along as quickly as they could do. So it's really about a shift in mindset. It's about thinking about those three things: your customer, your conduct, and your commercial agenda together, and starting to think about, what could you do to drive some continuous improvement, even if you're not necessarily able to make the big kind of whole-scale transformational changes that deliver great customer experiences at the same time as delivering good commercial and conduct outcomes. So it's a big balancing act, and I think for some organisations, the customer lens just feels like it might be like a little bit too much, depending on where they are in that kind of evolution.
No, fair enough, and I agree completely with what you're saying there, and I do often find that, well, specifically within change and transformation, I think it always starts with customer. I think it always starts with, how the customer will be effective, right? So what would be the point in bringing in technology and getting people to, AI, and, but I think somewhere along the way, often the customer gets lost in the operational cost and bringing the operational costs down. But the thing that I tend to find or think is that a lot of those operational costs are going to come down when you're focusing on the customer anyway, because ultimately the quicker the process is for the customer, the better the customer outcome. The quicker the process is, the more efficient the process is, and therefore the less operational cost that you're gonna you're going to incur anyway. But I do think that sometimes people kind of forget the reason why, and with technology massively, people can get sort of caught up in all of the fantastic things that technology can do, but forget the reason why they're trying to fix something. and quite often they'll fix things that aren't necessarily broken or are a little bit not pointless, but a little bit pointless, really. When if they thought about the customer the whole way through, you could have made taken far less time to make the changes that would have impacted the customer far greater, you know. So but I suppose that's just one of those things, really.
It is. And look, this isn't an insurance industry only challenge
Of course.
at all. And I think I've seen, certainly in over the last 10 years, loads of strides to move the agenda forward from a customer centricity perspective. But I think, like I said earlier, we've just never quite had the same burning platform. And I think Consumer Duty absolutely continued to make sure that the industry had a real focus on driving good customer outcomes. And I think that isn't just from a regulatory, conduct perspective, are we ticking those kind of KRI outcome boxes? But also it enables organisations to think differently about how it thinks about its customers, to embed that into the DNA of how it does stuff. All of that takes time. None of that happens quickly. And I think we just, as an industry, it's a bit like trying to, turn the oil tank around, isn't it? It's just slow sometimes. It doesn't mean that progress isn't happening. It's just not necessarily as easy and straightforward as it would be in a non-regulated environment, or an environment where customers demand more of us on a day-to-day basis because they have more interaction, such as the banking sector, for example.
I completely agree. I mean, if I look at I mean, I've been in this position a fair few years now, but if I just look back 5 years, it is slowly but surely getting there. But I do think that the rate of change is significantly slower than, like you say, maybe those that have more day-to-day, more than one-time interactions with their customer base. I do feel that's come along much quicker. But there's so many reasons why that is, and I mean I think you alluded to it there a lot about the legacy systems that are in place at the moment, and countless amounts of acquisitions over the years, all on different systems, all not communicate. It's
exactly.
To be frank, it's a nightmare,
complex.
Right? It is complex, so it is always going to take time. But I think the most important thing is that that it is making progress slowly but surely. So. On to the next question, which would be, if you could implement one game-changing initiative across the industry to improve customer experience, what would it be?
Okay, so one game-changing initiative. I'm going to flip it a little bit, and I think there's probably one thing that could come at us that creates that burning platform that will create, this sort of the improvement in CX across the insurance industry. And I think that will be the continued rise of AI assistants. And when I'm talking about AI assistants, I'm talking about, being able to go on to Google and say, I'm looking for insurance that gives me this, and this. And that goes off and it does all the research and it comes back with a set of recommendations for you. And we're going to see in the next 5-10 years that we've got less and less opportunity to get in front of consumers, to tell them about our products and our services. So we're going to have no choice but to make sure that we really genuinely understand their needs, and that those needs are articulated in our websites, our terms and conditions, in the right way, because it's going to, we're going to need prompt engineers that are going to be able to speak to these AI assistants, so that when people do start to rely on them more for sort of day-to-day decision making, including their insurance, we are absolutely part of their shortlist of recommendations. So rather than one big game-changing initiative that I think I would be able to drive, I think that will happen in the next 5 to 10 years, and it will drive the industry to have to think very differently about how it articulates and creates its products and its services, and how it communicates the benefits of those products and its services in a way that feels nuanced enough and personalised enough, so that, if John's going online and he's going, I want to get this, and this for my house insurance, and you're being really specific about your needs, that, the products for insurer X, Y, and Z all still pop up. Because if they don't understand you and they don't understand your needs, and they don't write the right information into their website so that the prompt, when the AI is going on. So that's what I think could be a real shift and could be becoming more of a burning platform to become much more customer centric.
Yeah, that's massive. I'd never, until you've mentioned that, I've never even thought about that, but it's so true. And I think it could really benefit insurers, because we were just talking
Yeah,
about differentiators, and how can you, and sometimes the misconcept of a comprehensive insurance and motor is just the same. It doesn't matter who you get insured by, it's still covered by the same thing. I think that when more people start using AI and then put down the specifics of what they're looking for to be covered, I think it will be good in a way, because it will differentiate certain products away from the
yeah,
mainstream products. But equally, you're right, you've got to make sure that the AI can actually get to that information to draw that out of the website to actually use it and put it forward. I think that would be huge. So yeah, good idea, really. So yeah.
thanks.
And
Yeah,
then
it's an interesting one, and like, look, I don't think it's happening tomorrow, but I think
no,
every insurer needs to start to think about, that the idea of having, teams of prompt engineers is something that
yeah,
2 years ago none of us were really thinking about. Now everybody's thinking about that as one of the core skills for the future. So it is going to come. Things are going to change.
absolutely. And even if you think of the take up of ChatGPT,
Yeah,
everybody, I mean,
completely.
everybody is using it. Even my mum was using it the other day, which I
Amazing.
was surprised by. And yeah, I mean, I've well, my dad can't even turn on a computer, I don't think, but my mum's on it, so that's
I was going to say, your
50%
mum
of the
sounds
people.
like she's like, away and computer literate enough for both of them, should I say?
Well, yeah, absolutely, but it just goes to show how big that is making a wave anyway, right?
Absolutely.
So that, and that's probably within the last 18 months to two
Yeah.
years that people have really started using it. So in the next 5 years, who knows where it will be. But just to sort of round up and finish off the conversation today, Vicky, what advice would you give to future leaders that are looking to make an impact in the CX or brand strategy?
I would say be inquisitive. Always try to be insight and data led. You know, don't ever be embarrassed about being the customer's biggest cheerleader.
Mm,
Be ambitious with your brand and what you want to stand for and how you want to tell your story. Um, Find your people would be the other thing I would say. Sometimes, there are people out there that are also, customer led, business people, but not everybody will get it. We've talked today about some of the challenges, and sometimes you have to be really tenacious. You have to be really prepared to challenge for the customer. But it's about making sure that you know that this absolutely works, being really evidence led, but being resilient and patient. And I guess sometimes FOMO is a really
mm,
good way of getting things done. Go off, find an advocate, work with them for a while, get them to make sure that they're telling other people what you're doing and how it's working. And they will do all of the hard work. Coming back to the conversation that we had earlier about, if somebody's satisfied, they'll tell 3 people or whatever else is. Get somebody else to do the hard work for you. Get somebody else to advocate for a customer-led approach. Don't always feel like you have to be the lone voice that's pushing that forward.
yeah, and I suppose it's quite interesting that comes round full circle in terms of the cheerleaders, because
Yep.
the same way a customer can be a cheerleader for you, and you know, I just going back to that point, it's just something that's come to the top of my head. If a customer gets the perfect outcome for what they're looking for, fair enough, they might only tell 3 people, but they'll be adamant that those 3 people will use the
Oh,
use the
completely.
insurer that they got the best experience from, right? And then
Yeah.
commercially, you've just got 3 additional policies on top of the one, and the one will stay for life as well. So
That's
yeah,
it.
bit of a sidetrack on that point, but it just came to my
But
head,
it
Vicky. So
matters. And like, look,
um,
we're all human beings at the end of the day, John. And like, look, we all want to tell our friends and our family when something's gone well. And I think, it's human nature, whether that's because you've nipped down to the supermarket and had a great experience, or your insurer delivered something that was above and beyond what you were expecting, you're going to tell people about it.
mm,
And yeah, so, and never lose heart. Because sometimes it can be hard work sometimes being the kind of the customer voice in the room, but people get it. And once they get it, you will find that people are absolutely banging on your door, and they want to do more and more of the customer-led balanced approach, and it's fantastic.
Well, hopefully that can inspire some of the future leaders to carry on knocking at the door and, get every insurer customer centric, aligned, focused, and, bringing in new policies like there's no tomorrow. But we have reached the time, unfortunately, Vicky.
Wonderful.
It's been a fantastic conversation with yourself. Really appreciate your time. To everybody that's watched it, I hope that you get some interesting insights and have enjoyed the episode. But I suppose for now it's goodbye and see you next time. But appreciate it, Vicky. Thanks for your time.